And welcome back to the channel. We're going to start right away with the parts list, as I have had several questions as to what items I've used. And take a look at the parts list, and if you don't catch it right away, I will go ahead and repeat that at the end of this video. And I just want to take that quick short time to thank everybody for coming back to the channel. And if you can, please comment, like, and subscribe to keep this channel growing and giving you more of this instruction. Let's get started with a quick breakdown of what this item actually consists of, because I know the parts list may not be a reminder for many, and it's best to see it visually, as we are a visual people. So let's take a look at the scythe from the Batman Dark Knight's Metal. I've already done this in a different video, and I've taken the hands from Robin King, as he did come with extra hands, so I decided to use these. We will have to close those up so that it can hold the accessory. Now, I purchased this custom sculpt from SYTHE off of eBay, a two-piece unit. It is a resin. The arms and the jacket, that comes from Last Night on Earth Scarecrow. If you don't recognize those, it's probably because you didn't like it anyway. In any case, this is what I used for this. And of course, now coming down to the My Hero Academia torso. All I used was the torso itself with the actual shirt. The inside mechanism is also from My Hero Academia. And of course, you've got the legs from the White Knight Joker. So taking a new X-Acto blade is going to be the best thing for cutting down the collar on the torso. The better the blade, the cleaner the cut, and of course we need to cut down this collar because we want the head to sit down as close as possible on the shoulders. And the cleaner the cut means that we will not have to polish it out with any sanding. Take a look at the tagline one more time and make sure you purchase one for yourself on eBay from that seller. And this is a resin custom sculpt. It is or has a removable hat, and we will keep it removable by attaching a magnet. It comes this way for easy painting, so it will not be attached when you receive it. So we are going to join the two pieces together using magnets. The head is hollow, so I'm going to fill it in with epoxy sculpt. I'm then going to attach the magnet or insert the magnet, push it down into the soft putty, and keep it flush with the surface. The excess I will clean away, and that way I can have it all as one piece. Then I'll let it dry for 8 hours because I want the epoxy sculpt to hold in that magnet permanently. Our next step in the process is to remove the stump from underneath the hat. You can file it down if you want, but the quickest and best way to do it is to use a Dremel tool. And although this is a hard resin, be very careful. You can still damage the resin if you're not careful. So you want to bring it down and keep it flush with the surface because you want to countersink the next magnet into the hat and keep it flush with the surface. Once you create a space for the magnet, being the thickness of that magnet, then you're going to glue it down with your choice of glue. You can use Gorilla Glue, Fabri-Tac, super glue, whatever you think is going to be the best for you. I personally found that Gorilla Glue worked out the best. Regardless of the glue that you may want to use, Fabri-Tac or Gorilla Glue, let it dry for at least 4 hours, because that's going to give it a stronger hold than just the 20 minutes with the activator. So while the other pieces are drying, we're going to remove the neck off of the custom sculpt. It is a thick resin and it is a hard resin, even though be very careful as the Dremel can slip and damage the rest of the sculpt. So once you remove the neck, contour it to fit the neck that is on the actual ACADAMIA torso. And we're going to place this piece of fabric underneath to extend that sculpting, keep it as a buffer. So moving on to painting, you can see my basic colors. That's all I'm using for this dry brushing. I'm just mixing the colors that I need. And I'm going to go in and very lightly brush over the details to bring those out. We're not covering it in paint, we're only bringing out the details with the dry brushing. If you want to go with a lighter color, fantastic. If you want to go with a darker color, it's all up to you. What paint to use? I'm pretty much just using craft paints. I'm not using anything excessive because this is just dry brushing. So those are very inexpensive. If you want to go expensive with the Vallejo paints, the Citadel paints, that's fine. It's all up to you. I use what I have and it seems to work. Repeat the dry brushing technique with all of the other pieces, in this case both arms and the jacket, according to your liking. So when it comes to the hands, I just mixed in more gold and orange together to create a more of a bronzed metal look. And then I went ahead and painted the hands. Now because it is acrylic, it will require maybe 3 or 4 coats to cover it thoroughly, and you need to let it dry a few hours for the paint to truly cure. Just because you use a hair dryer does not mean that the paint is actually dry. It's dry to the touch, but the paint itself is not cured or even adhered to the surface. So even if you use primer, allow it to dry a few hours. Now you can add the black wash to the coat and the arms. And the black wash is literally just that. It's black paint that has been diluted, and it's only going to go on the shadow areas or the contouring. So wipe away the excess either with your brush, a dry brush, or with a sponge. And this is totally going to change the look and mood of those different articles. Now remember, if you do add a black wash on this second step, it may change the color of those highlights that you added. So you may have to add those back in. It all depends on what step you took first and what paint you used. we've made it to the legs and bottom part of the torso, and we're going to use the Vallejo Primer Gray to cover it up and give us a base for the paint to stick to. And yes, we'll be covering the joints in this as well. So my recommendation for this is to use an airbrush as best you can to cover a nice, even, clean tone all across the surface. And as you cover it, make sure you allow time for it to dry and then move the joints so you can actually get into those areas. If you want to take the legs apart, that's fine. It's not an issue. It's just that for this, you really didn't need to, because you can move the legs far enough to get into those joints. Continue working with the torso. You're going to use the Vallejo Gray Primer once again, and you're going to eliminate that giant letter A. It may take you 4 or 5 coats of primer to truly eliminate it. Now, as you can see with the airbrush, this Vallejo Gray Primer has a tendency to clog it up. So you're gonna have to continuously check so that it is a clean nozzle and you get a nice even spray. And the airbrush will give you a beautiful coverage, and it'll actually look store-bought when you are actually finished with it. Allow the Vallejo primer to dry enough time, and I mean enough time, but at least maybe 2 hours, maybe even 4 hours, depending on the conditions. If you're going to use a hair dryer, fantastic, but please make sure it is truly dry, not sticky, before you apply the next color. Now, although I did spray enough layers of Vallejo primer, I can still see that letter A, but that's not a problem. It's going to be eliminated by painting over it with the red orange that I thinned down for the airbrush. Now, once again, because it is in acrylic, it will take you several layers to apply the color. It doesn't all go on in one shot, so it may take you 4 or 5 layers of paint to cover everything up completely. If you want to accent some of those wrinkles and the shadows, then you just add a darker color, and you could add black or you could add brown to darken that orange and come in and add the shadowing on the contouring that's on the wrinkles on the fabric. So this is what it looks like in the test fit. The colors look awesome. This thing really, really pops. Now, I haven't sealed it yet. I'll do that shortly. For the meantime, let's move on to the pants. Let's mix the colors for the brown pants. I mixed some black, some brown, some orange for an ugly looking brown, because that's kind of what his pants look like. It's kind of an ugly chocolate color. And then I airbrushed those on as well. And yes, it took several coats. And as you'll see in the rest of the clip, you will have to bend those knees to get into those crevices. Now, the nice thing about the Mcfarlane figures is that they do have a recessed joint. So on the front of the knees, you'll have very, very minimal paint rub. And as you paint it or use your primer and you bend the knees, you'll see where it rubs. Those are the only areas you're going to have to sand down to then repaint. If you sand everything down, you just make an excessive work, and there's really no need to. Only sand down the areas that actually rub. You actually do that for the back as well, And also on the back, it does have a recess on some of those joints depending on the figure. So as you bend it, you'll see where it rubs. Well, that's the only areas you'll have to sand down. So you can use a small Dremel tool to do so, or a file, or if you want to use sandpaper, fine. It just depends from figure to figure. There's no science to it, and then there's no magic way to do it for all the figures. Every single one is going to vary. So let's move on to the custom sculpt, because I know a lot of you want to see how this was actually executed. I can't show you all the tiny details because I've had to wear goggles to get even close to all the details, so I can't get the camera in as well. But I'll show you this process that I used. Obviously, the first one is primering and allowing the primer to dry enough time for you to apply the paint. So I started with the hat because it is removable. I actually left the hat on so that I could now paint it easily. With the magnet, that makes it so much easier, so much more convenient, because I can remove it and then work on the head. So the base color was a golden brown, kind of a wheat color for the hat. So very simple, very basic. Taking a finer brush, I added a black wash on the inside of the hat by the band, underneath the band and above the band. And I kept it wet as long as possible so that I can use a second brush and then fan out the wet black wash while it's still wet. This is how it's going to work. If it dries, then it's just going to leave a mark. It'll look like sweat bands instead of an actual shading. So if you want to start with the bottom and then the top, that's fine. It just depends on how much detail you want to bring out in this hat. And unfortunately, all the detail is actually in the hat band, not on the hat itself. It doesn't have any texture. You'd have to use something else to bring out texture. Now let's move on to the band on the hat. I'm just mixing in the same colors, just changing the quantity of the mix to get the tone that I want. I start in the center of the hat band so I can paint most of it. I will then come back around and paint to the edges at the top and at the bottom. Once that is dry, I will come back with a black wash, and on the band, then I will bring out the details with that black wash. This is what your finished hat should look like, or according to the colors that you used. Make sure you give it 4 hours before you do any other retouching to it. Now let's move on to the mask. here I am just finalizing it with dry brush, bringing out the highlights in the texture. Again, it is just a dry brush going over the mask itself. Start with the mask, then work the details on the face. Unfortunately, I can't show you those details because I had to use goggles to get anywhere near that. Once you're finished with the mask, you finish the details on the face and then you cover those up with your sealant. I used a Tamiya X22 on the eyes and the teeth to keep them looking wet. Then give it a dry time of 20 minutes. Then you can come back and seal the mask with your Model Masters flat clear coat, and that will then protect the mask itself. And of course you can do that with the hat also. Well, you made it this far, but we're still not done. It's now time to look over the work and find out what corrections need to be done. I've already seen several. I'm sure you've probably seen some in the video as well, but I'll do as many as I can in the video here to show you what I did. So one of them right off the bat is the neck. I do like the addition underneath that I put in there, but it's still, for me, it wasn't enough. I wanted more of a three-dimensional look and I wanted to protect the paint on the shirt. So I used that same material, which is this right here. It's like a canvas, and I'm going to create a second buffer onto that. That way when I move the head around, it doesn't scratch the paint and it doesn't show any gappage. And then underneath the hat, looks like I got some paint rub, so I got to go back in and fix that. And of course, I did not paint the top of the head because I don't want it to scratch, and I'm not going to be pulling the hat off. It's going to stay on. And the second correction that needs to be done is some of the dry brushing on the metal pieces on the arm. I lost some of that detail, so I have to go back in there and put that back in. The hands need to be corrected. I've got to heat those up to close them down so I can hold the accessories. And this is one detail maybe nobody cares about, but it makes a difference to me. I really want to have an inside liner on the jacket, not just the ugly plastic. So I'm going to put something inside. Now the last thing is to fix those ugly ball joints. And I've got a solution here, but I'm not too happy with it. I've got to revise it. I'll show you what I did. So I revised the covering on the joint. I kept the same fabric, which is that canvas, and I used a thinner rope and I glued it in place, and it just looks that much better. This is the liner that I used on the inside of the jacket, a shirt from a 1/12 action figure. I cut it down, and then I used this for the collar. Well, underneath the actual collar, it's more of a buffer, and it'll cover any gappage and it'll protect that paint when I move that head around. Let's put everything back together now that I've made those alterations to the figure. I like the way this is starting to look. It almost has that Mezco feel to it. And that's the nice thing about these figures from Mcfarlane is they are so modular, you can interchange pieces easily. So now you have an idea of why he tends to just repaint things and resell them, because they work. And also, if you've already taken a mental count of how much money spent on this figure, you're looking at $130 just to do this. So if you wanted to mass produce this, well, it cost him $100,000 for a mold. So now you know exactly why he wants to reuse some of those parts. But right now you're looking at $130 just in parts. Painting, you're looking at another $75. So altogether, yeah, it can get expensive to have a custom-made action figure. So I added a wire to the ankles to hold the rope in place while the glue dried. And now it's time to remove it and do some touch-ups on that rope so that it actually looks the part on this figure. And I added also a rope to the waist, not as a belt, but actually on the animated character it goes on his shirt, over his shirt, and this gave it kind of like the final touch. Now if you look at the background, I have all kinds of different paints. There is no one magic paint. Each paint works different, it does things different, it mixes different. Use the tools you have and get the tools you need. There's no one magic brand that does everything. In the meantime, I'm going to go over the parts list that were used on this figure. Let's take a look. Here's our parts list, a quick recap. My Hero Academia torso. We have the arms and jacket from the Scarecrow, and the legs are from the Joker White Knight, the hands from Robin King, and that scythe is from Batman. And of course, that custom figure head sculpt is from sealteamrick. eBay seller, check out his stuff. I'm going to leave you with some video now of the figure itself fully finished. If you like the video, make sure you give it a like, comment, and please subscribe for more content like this. Help me get this channel growing. In the meantime, enjoy customizing your figures.